it's time for you to listen to me about the ASUS Zenbook 14. We're going to be talking about this laptop here today because I was able to pick this up at a decent special over at Best Buy. This thing came in on only $550, and so I decided to go ahead and check it out versus the normal $700 price tag that this thing comes in at, which I kind of have to take both into account. Hopefully, they'll put it on more sale, but the ASUS Zenbook 14 actually has a lot going for it. I want to talk about it in comparison to the other 4000U series laptops that I've been able to check out, both the Acer Swift 3 as well as the Lenovo Flex 5. The Zenbook 14 actually has its place amongst them. So let's talk about the specs. You got the Ryzen 5 4500U for the CPU with the Vega 6 integrated graphics, but this boy comes with a dedicated graphics card of the NVIDIA MX350. You've got 8 gigs of dual channel RAM, which is LPDDR4X at 4266 megahertz. It's non-upgradable. You've got a 256 gig NVMe SSD, which may be upgradable, but I had a wicked time trying to get the bottom plate of this thing off. Like, I unscrewed all of the screws I could see, and my guess is that they put some hidden screws under the feet, or I'm just a weak man and I decided not to try to rip off the bottom chassis. Either way, not super easily accessible in case you want to look to upgrade the SSD later on down the line. It does have Wi-Fi 6 with the Intel AX200 as well as Bluetooth 5.0. Those are the general specs of the laptop. 256 gigs storage, 8 gigs of RAM, not necessarily the highest end thing that you're looking at, and for $700, a little disappointing in that department, at least according to me. If I'm spending an extra $100, I would expect that this would have at least 512 gigs at a minimum, and I would also expect the drive to be a little bit faster because the drive speed, especially compared to the Lenovo Flex 5 and the Swift 3, is slower. It comes in at 1.6 gigabytes per second read and only 800 megabytes per second write, which is 400 megs slower on the read and about 200 megs slower on the write compared to the other notebooks that I'm referring to. So not necessarily the greatest. And also CPU performance, kind of slow. Came in at 804 Cinebench R15 score compared to the Lenovo Flex 5, which has the exact same processor in it, mind you, which got a score of 915. So we're looking at nearly a roughly 10% plus performance drop on the Zenbook 13. I actually couldn't necessarily find out the exclusive reasons why. Number one, it doesn't look like there was any thermal limiting that was happening. Number two, I have suspicions that the LPDDR4 is not necessarily good for Zen 2 mobile laptops, but I'll talk about that in a future video, as I mentioned in a Swift 3 video. But that's not why you would consider the Zenbook 14. No, this thing has some features that the other ones don't, which number one, mainly, is the size. This is a 14-inch laptop baked into a 13-inch chassis. It is physically smaller than all of the other laptops that we've checked out with a 92+% screen to body ratio. It's a same size screen, 1080p IPS panel, which we'll get to that in a second, is better than the other ones as well. It's just a small laptop. Reece's MacBook Air is a 13-inch screen. This is a 14-inch screen, and this is still smaller than his MacBook Air. But let's talk about that panel for a second. It's 1080p IPS, not a touchscreen, which is a downside to a lot of people, but it has 100% sRGB coverage with 300 nits brightness, which is way better than the other panels on these two boys, which are both 60% sRGB coverage with 250 nits brightness. So this has by far the best screen out of the bunch that I've checked out in this rough price point. Viewing angles are good, actually looks pretty phenomenal, but battery life, not as good, especially considering it has that dedicated GPU. You do get your battery life eaten away to some extent. With the 50-watt-hour lithium polymer battery that's in this boy, I got 4 hours and 48 minutes on my normal battery life test, and the competing Lenovo Flex 5 and the Acer Swift 3, this one came in at just under 6 hours. This one came in at just over 7 hours. The Zenbook 14 being the worst of the bunch. If you disable your MX350, just get rid of it completely, I actually got closer to 6 hours at 5 hours and 45 minutes, which is more in line with where the Flex 5 came in on everything. But in this chassis, you got a few IOs. You got on the left side the power in, the USB 3 10 gigabit port, an HDMI, and a USB-C, also 10 gigabit port. On the right side, you got a micro SD reader, which is nifty, a USB 2.0 port, as well as a headphone mic combo. Not the greatest IO in the world, but is kind of just functional for whoever might need it. And then let's talk about the actual build quality of the chassis. It's actually a CNC'd aluminum alloy chassis, which makes it incredibly sturdy, incredibly like durable. It feels really rugged. I'm actually really happy with the way the Zenbook 14 feels. It feels way more premium than the other two notebooks, which have more of a plastic shell. This guy actually is pretty well put together, and ASUS claims that it has passed military grade quality, the MIL STD 810G standard, which you can read more about that in case you want. There are like different parameters that laptops have to undergo, and apparently this one got that certification. It's got a couple other features that necessarily you wouldn't find in other ones, like the fact that it goes back 145 degrees by the fact that the hinge actually lifts the notebook up off the table a little bit by 3 degrees in order to get that extra degree of separation, which is okay, it's fine. It's 0.7 inches thin, 2.65 pounds, and it's got a few upgrades over previous Zenbook lineups. Number one, the touchpad is 32% bigger than the previous one. It is quite large, especially for its size, and it's fine, like not much to write home about. The keyboard, also fine. The only negative that I would seriously note here is that while it does have a white backlight, it's pathetically weak. It's fine if you're in like pitch black, but turning it on when there's any sort of light, you won't notice that it's there. And then number two, they included a dedicated My ASUS button, which is stupid. I'm just gonna call it out. Don't include dedicated function buttons for your own dang bloatware. Stop it, ASUS. Typing on it was okay. There's a 1.4 millimeter key travel, which feels sufficiently fine. It's a bit mushy, but it works. I could hit my 90 word per minute average on this laptop, no problem. Palm rejection on the wider touchpad actually works phenomenally. Had no accidental touches going on there. Let's talk about the webcam and mic for a second. The webcam quality on the ASUS Zenbook 14 is slightly anus. It's like the wrong color temperature. There's too much grain. It's not really a good webcam. I'm comparing this directly to the Acer Swift 3, which seems to be picking up more lifelike looks than the Zenbook 14. Microphone's not too bad. The dual array cameras help to block out some sound. It's not so awful when you start typing on the keyboard or you start clicking on the touchpad. It's okay. Sufficient, right? And it exists. So if you need it, it's there, but it's not amazing. Talk about the other features of the laptop quickly. It has speakers. Laptops have speakers, wouldn't you know? It also has their Sonic Master audio software. It's fine. It's plenty loud at max volumes. There's not really any distortion. It's not tinny. Actually, though, it actually does have a surprising amount of low-end response, which I wasn't expecting. It doesn't have a sub of any kind, but it definitely hit the low frequencies a little bit better than the other budget laptops that I've checked out. And there are nice speaker grills at the bottom that are downward firing, and there's a little bit of tinny reverb when you like do the Windows sound, bing, bing. It like resonates through the chassis. You can hear that it's definitely a metal chassis, which is a little annoying, but I turned off Windows sounds altogether, so it didn't really affect me. It's actually kind of light on the pre-installed software as well. Only really has Alexa, Dropbox, and My ASUS installed, which are all easy to just dispose of into the trash where they belong. And then the only other thing that I will note is that the fan is slightly audible during gameplay, which I haven't experienced on the other 8 Ryzen APU laptops that I've checked out. This one with the MX350 obviously is outputting a little bit more heat and therefore is a little bit more noisy when you're actually using it under heavy load. But let's talk about that MX350 performance for a little bit. It's, again, I don't know what it is, and I have to do more investigation. It performed not as good as I was expecting. The MX350 performed about as good as the 4700U and the 4500U on the other laptops that I've checked out. Valorant got 133 FPS, average at 720p medium. Fortnite was 86 FPS, and PUBG was 55 FPS. The PUBG one, the highest one of the bunch, it does look like when you're getting into more graphically ridiculous games, then yeah, it does help. I say ridiculous, not because PUBG is hard to run, but because it's horrendously unoptimized, and so that's a little bit more where that is. I think the LPDDR is holding it back, but I'll get to that at some future video. I keep saying this, and I'm gonna do all of the testing that I need to. So it's definitely, this laptop, rounding it out, the most beautiful of the new Ryzen APU laptops that I've seen, bar none. The LPDDR4 does seem to be holding back performance a little bit. The MX350 definitely holds back battery life for sure. And so if you know you're not necessarily gonna need it, you can go ahead and disable it. And honestly, the Vega 6 gets so close in integrated benchmarks that like, Do you really need the MX350? Is it worth paying for? I'm not necessarily sure. The screen is phenomenal compared to the alternatives. 100% sRGB coverage is good. The extra brightness is nice, and paying $550 for this versus $600 or $650 versus for the Lenovo Flex 5 or the Acer Swift 3, this absolutely came in as the best budget buy that I could find. That would be great for toting around to college or classes or just doing light gaming at Starbucks. It hits really well. You are losing out on the 2-in-1 functionality versus the Lenovo Flex 5, but you're gaining big in panel quality, build quality, and the form factor that the Zenbook comes in, which to a lot of people is something that actually does matter. And one of my favorite features that you can find on a laptop that the Zenbook 14 supports, one finger hinge lift. You don't have to hold the laptop down in order to raise the screen, which I think is just nifty. I just think they're neat. I think the Zenbook 14 is definitely neat. I would not pay $700 for it, which is the current price. I somehow discovered it when it was on sale for $550, and that's what I paid. If you can find it for $550, I would absolutely recommend it. There are key considerations. There are limitations to this thing, such as the lack of RAM, such as the lack of the SSD. Can't really upgrade that. And the backlight's kind of lame. But other than that, I got what I wanted out of it, and I'm actually really happy with the Zenbook 14, especially for $550. So ASUS, good job on making that. Stop including dedicated buttons for your My ASUS crap. That's my personal takeaway on this. Let me know what you think of the Zenbook 14. Let me know what you thought of the Lenovo Flex 5, which you can check out in a video right up there. As well, you can click there for the Acer Swift 3 laptop review that we did recently. And I know I've mentioned this several times. I'm absolutely investigating it at this point. The difference between regular DDR4, which is what the Flex 5 has, and then LPDDR4, which is what these two have. This has a Ryzen 7 4700U with the Vega 7 graphics, performed about the same as the 4500U. This has the MX350 and performed about the same. So I need to figure out what's going on here, because some bandwidth stuff's going on with Zen 2 that I think is actually limiting everything. It's definitely not thermals, because thermals were under check. They were right around 75 degrees Celsius for all three of these devices. I have sneaking suspicions, and I may be wrong, but I gotta dig deep on this one, and I'm gonna dig myself out of this video. Bye.